Many hundreds of years ago, in ancient Greece, there lived a king named Midas. His home was a white stone palace overlooking the land of Phrygia, where he was a fair and kind ruler over all the citizens. They loved him and thought he was an excellent king because he did not tax them heavily and lived a modest life. He lived with his lovely wife, Queen Midas, and young son named Lyteraces. He adored them, and they had everything they could possibly need. Their lives were very happy. One day, Midas was bathing in the reeds at the bottom of his garden. The warm river water washed all over him, and he sang as he rinsed himself. "Oh, I'm as happy as can be, as happy ever should be, happy as the happiest man is me." From out of the reeds on the other side of the river bank popped a horned head. A satyr had heard Midas's song, and it had woken him up from a deep slumber. "What a lovely song you have there, sir," shouted the satyr across the river bank. As he trotted through the water, Midas saw he had the legs of a goat to match the horns on his head. He recognized him at once as a servant of Dionysus, the god of fine food and merriment. Midas had heard the legends of these creatures. If you treated them with goodwill, they had been known to grant wishes. Midas immediately invited the satyr into his house for some food and a comfortable bed to sleep in. Midas was a kind and hospitable host, so the satyr stayed for 10 days and nights. "Please eat as much as you like and stay as long as you need, my friend," said Midas warmly. "I have plenty, and to share it with you would be an honor." After the 10 days and nights had passed, the satyr decided it was time to move on. Before he left, he said to Midas, "Sir, you have been so kind to me. Please allow me to grant you a wish. My master, Dionysus, would be happy to give you anything you desire." "Well, satyr, I have everything I need, but often I wonder how much happier I could be if I was richer. If you please, I would like more gold. I would like everything I touch to turn to gold. A man with a golden touch, he could truly buy everything the world has to offer." The satyr looked gravely at Midas. "What you ask for is dangerous, my friend," said the satyr. "The richest men are not always the happiest." Overcome with the idea of great wealth, Midas did not listen. "This is my only wish." Midas woke up the next morning and remembered his wish. He eagerly touched his fingertips to his bed. Crack! His sheets turned into gleaming golden pieces. Midas whooped with delight. The satyr had granted his wish. "Now I can be the richest man in all the world. Just think of the wealth I can have." He pulled a bunch of grapes from a nearby fruit bowl to eat for breakfast. Crack! The grapes turned into gold, just like the bed sheets. "Oh dear," said Midas, "I suppose I will need to find something else to eat." Midas wandered through his house, opening doors that turned to gold underneath his magical fingers, drawing curtains that promptly fell from their rails under their new weight. He grasped a goblet of water, and even the liquid turned to solid under his touch. With horror, Midas began to realize what he had done. How would he eat? What would he wear? He began to panic and ran outside to find Queen Midas and Lityerses. The queen greeted him with a kiss. Crack! As his arms closed around her, Queen Midas turned into a statue of pure gold. Crack! Lityerses ran to embrace his father, but as soon as their hands touched, the boy, too, became a shimmering, solid statue. "No, no," he cried. "The satyr was right. Now I am rich beyond any man or king, but I will be lonely forever. I would give up all this wealth for just one more real embrace with my son." Midas sobbed and sobbed, too afraid to touch anything else or even to move. When he finally looked up, the satyr was standing near him. "Midas, I have given you what you wished for," said the satyr. "Why are you not enjoying your wealth?" "My greed," Midas wailed. "My desires have been my downfall. I would be the poorest man in the kingdom if I could have one more kiss from my wife." "Now you see my meaning. The richest men cannot buy the love of a child or the sweet embrace of a wife. You are a good man at heart, Midas. For this, I will give you one more chance." With a terrible noise, the golden statues of Queen Midas and Lityerses split down the middle like cracked nuts. In the center, the two stood just as they had before they were frozen. King Midas cried tears of joy and hugged his family close to his chest. His golden touch was gone. Midas turned to thank the satyr, but he had already disappeared again. "I have learned so much from the wise creature," said Midas. "Never again shall I let my greed cloud the truly important things in my life." Once upon a time, a little girl named Alice was sitting in her garden with her sister Dinah on a lovely summer day. Alice was beginning to get bored listening to her sister read a dull book aloud. Suddenly, Alice spotted a white rabbit with pink eyes running by. The rabbit was wearing a waistcoat and pocket watch. Alice had never seen a rabbit wearing clothes before. She heard the rabbit shout, "I'm late! I'm so very late!" Astonished, she got up from amongst the flowers and ran after him. Where could such a rabbit be going? Alice wondered. She saw him jump into a hole beside a tree. She peered down into the hole, wondering where it might lead. She found herself leaning so far forward that she began to topple head first into the hole. Down and down, she fell through the darkness for what seemed like an age. Suddenly, she hit the floor with a soft thud. She had landed in a room with odd-sized doors of different colors, filling every inch of the walls. There was a little table next to her. It only had 3 legs, and on it was a tiny gold key and a pink glass bottle. The label around the bottle's neck said, "Drink me." Alice picked up the little key and tried it in all the doors. It fit in the smallest one, which was no bigger than a sheet of paper. "I'm too big to fit through such a little door," Alice mused. "But maybe this drink will help me." She drank every last drop of the pink liquid and began to shrink. She shrunk down and down until she was no bigger than the dolls she played with at home, a perfect size to fit through the door. On the other side, she found a beautiful garden filled with hundreds of different flowers. The flowers were taller than Alice, and they all had pretty faces surrounded by lush petals. "A girl!" they shrieked in high-pitched voices. "A dirty little girl!" "I'm not dirty," said Alice crossly. I fell down a rabbit hole." She decided she didn't like these flowers much, so she walked onwards through the garden. Eventually, she came across a giant gray mushroom. On top of it, there sat a fat green caterpillar. He was blowing bubbles from a large wand and wore a fancy blue jacket. "Hello, sir," she called up. "I'm trying to get back to my regular size. Can you help?" The caterpillar lazily blew more bubbles. "One side makes you big. The other side makes you small," he purred to Alice. "One side of what?" she called back. "The mushroom, of course." Alice couldn't decide which side to pick, so she closed her eyes and grabbed a handful of mushroom. As she nibbled, she began to grow taller. "Thank goodness!" she cried. "I wonder what I should do now." "You could go that way to the Mad Hatter," said a voice, "or that way to the March Hare." Alice looked up and saw an orange cat sitting in a tree. He had a huge toothy grin and bushy tail. "Tell them the Cheshire Cat sent you," he said, still smiling. To Alice's surprise, he slowly faded away to nothingness, as if he'd never been there. Alice walked on until she came to a huge table in the middle of the trees. It was filled with pots of jam and scones, teapots, teacups, and cakes. "A tea party," thought Alice. A man with a wonky top hat and wild hair popped up from one of the seats. "If you want to eat, you have to answer a riddle," he screeched at Alice. "Oh, I love riddles," said Alice. "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" asked a giant hare with long brown ears. Alice guessed many different answers, but none made sense. "Have you given up?" asked the Mad Hatter. "Yes, what's the answer?" replied Alice. "Oh, we haven't the faintest idea," screamed the Hatter, and he and the March Hare fell about laughing. Alice was very cross. What a silly riddle if it didn't have an answer! She stomped away from the table. Soon she came across a palace with a huge rose garden filled with red roses. The Queen of Hearts was in the rose garden playing croquet. She was hitting the ball angrily with an upside-down flamingo. She seemed very annoyed as she smacked the ball across the garden. She screamed when she spotted Alice and pointed a fat finger towards her. "Someone's been stealing my tarts," she bellowed. "This girl, she's been stealing them." Alice was quite astonished. She was certain she hadn't eaten any tarts. Still, the Queen's guards seized her. They dragged Alice to a courtroom that was filled with all the different people Alice had met that day. In the jury box sat the March Hare, the Mad Hatter, the Caterpillar, and the Cheshire Cat. The judge entered in his wig and gown. It was the White Rabbit. "Little girl," he squeaked, "you are accused of stealing the Queen's jam tarts. How do you plead?" The court erupted into noise, and the Queen shrieked, "Off with her head!" The rabbit banged his little hammer. Alice felt someone touch her shoulder and opened her eyes. "Wake up," said her sister. "Oh!" cried Alice. "I had such a strange dream," said Alice. She told her sister all about the rabbit, the tea party, the Queen of Hearts, and the trial. Dinah wasn't paying much attention as she started reading her book again. Alice stopped and didn't bother to tell her any more. So she got up and wandered back through the garden into her house. Behind her, a little white rabbit with pink eyes scurried across the flower beds. Many years ago, in the time of swashbuckling pirates, talking parrots, and buried treasure, there lived a young boy named Jim Hawkins. Jim worked with his mother at their inn on the harbor, serving fish and chips and warm drinks to all the sailors who passed through. Sailors often rested overnight at the inn. One day, a grumpy old seaman by the name of Black Dog came to stay with Jim and his mother. He slept at the inn for around a week. Jim thought him to be quite unfriendly, so he never learned much about him. One morning, Jim went to clean Black Dog's room and was astonished to find he had disappeared. He was nowhere to be found, so Jim checked through his possessions to see if they might hold any clues to the mysterious guest. Inside Black Dog's trunk, he had a crumbled yellow map. It showed a web of little islands, one with a big red X. Jim was very excited. He took the map to show his good friend Squire and the town doctor, Dr. Livesey. He was a wise and well-respected man, so Jim was sure he'd know what to do. "This looks like a map of hidden treasure," said Dr. Livesey, inspecting the map. "Looks like an adventure to me," said Squire. Jim and the two men agreed to set sail as soon as possible along the passage marked on the mysterious map. They recruited a small crew and set sail by the weekend. The ship's cook was an especially interesting character. John Silver had only one leg, so used a wooden stick in place of another. He had a large parrot named Flint, who always sat on his shoulder, and he and the bird would tell amazing tall tales that had Jim rolling on the floor laughing. He seemed like a pleasant fellow, and all of the crew loved to hear him tell stories of his adventures at sea. They grew nearer and nearer to the island marked on the map with the big red X. One night, Jim couldn't sleep through the rolling of the waves, so he went up from his bunk towards the kitchen for a midnight snack. He heard low, cackling voices inside the kitchen and stopped to listen. "As soon as we reach the island, we will take the rest of the crew as prisoners. Then we can use the map to find the treasure for ourselves." It was John Silver! Jim gasped and ran down to wake Dr. Livesey and Squire. Livesey shook his head. "John Silver is no ordinary cook. He must be the dreadful pirate, Long John Silver. He is well known across the waters as a dangerous and nasty man. He and his friends are pretending to be our crew so they can tie us up and steal our treasure." Together, the three men hatched a plan to thwart Long John Silver. As soon as dawn was breaking and they were near enough to the island, Jim jumped from the ship and swam to shore. He began to search for the treasure before the pirates could get to it. Along the way, he met an old man with a big, long beard, wearing ragged clothes. He introduced himself as Ben Gunn and told Jim he had been trapped on the island for many years. Jim told him the story about Long John Silver and the treasure, and Ben agreed to help at once, for it was Long John Silver who had abandoned him on the island so long ago. Ben Gunn knew the island better than any man, so he laid out several snares for the unsuspecting pirates. Together, Jim and Ben quickly dug holes and covered them over with big palm leaves. They made catapults out of thick tree branches and loaded them with heavy coconuts. Then they laid flat on the ground and waited for Long John Silver and his pirate crew to stumble into their traps. Just after midday, the pirates appeared on the island, waving their pistols. Using the map as a guide, they traveled towards the red X, hoping to uncover the treasure. Bunk, bunk, bunk! Ben and Jim fired their catapults, and heavy brown coconuts rained down on the pirates' heads. Whoosh! The palm leaf floor fell out from under them, and they fell down into the sandy holes. The pirates were trapped. Jim and Ben cheered. They ran all over the island looking for the treasure. When they finally uncovered the right spot, they found chests filled to the brim with glittering gold coins and jewelry. They packed their loot and swam back to the boat, where they freed Dr. Livesey and Squire and started the long journey home. The pirates were left trapped on the island and learned an important lesson. Greediness will often leave you short, and teamwork has its own reward. Many years ago, a young boy named Oliver Twist lived in London. The city was filthy because new factories and machines were being built every day, spewing out smoke and oil. He had no mother or father, so he lived in an orphanage until he was old enough to work. Then, every day, he would be sent with the other boys to toil in one of the factories, sewing buttons onto shirts and polishing machinery. They didn't get paid any money, and they never got a day off. But nobody would stand up for them because they didn't have families of their own. Oliver and all the boys were very miserable. They were fed one meal a day, a tiny bowl of thin porridge called gruel. The gruel was watery and tasted horrible, but it was the only food that they were allowed to eat. One day, Oliver was so hungry that he decided to ask the cook for more food. "Please, sir," he said, trembling, "I want some more." "More?" cried the cook. "We feed all of you boys every day, and you ask for more? You ungrateful rat! If we're not good enough for you, you can go and live somewhere else." The cook grabbed Oliver by the ear, dragged him outside, and locked the door. Oliver was alone on the streets. He wandered around between the sooty houses, scavenging through the bins for scraps of food. He slept among the rats at night. He felt even more miserable than before because now he was alone. Even the factory was better than this. After he had been living on the streets for a few days, he met a very scruffy young boy. "Hello there," said the boy. "You look hungry. Would you like to come with me to find some food?" Oliver was a little bit scared of the boy, but he had nothing else to do and nowhere else to go, so he decided to follow him. "They call me the Artful Dodger," said the boy. "I live in a house with lots of other boys, and we all get to play on the streets all day together. We get fed, and we have good fun." The Artful Dodger led Oliver down an alley and through an old wooden door. Inside it was just as he had said, rows of beds filled with other grubby little boys, all shouting and playing. The Artful Dodger introduced Oliver to Fagin, the old man who looked after all the boys. He was tall and thin and had a sinister, toothless smile. "We'll look after you here, boy," he grinned, "as long as you pay your way." The next day, the Artful Dodger took Oliver out onto the streets. "I'm going to show you how we play," he said. He snuck up behind a man who was walking along the pavement, wearing a nicely tailored suit and carrying a pocket watch. With a swift movement, the Artful Dodger put his hand into the back pocket of the man and pulled out a wad of money. He ran back to Oliver laughing and fanning himself with the money. "See," he said, "now we give this to Fagin, and he lets us stay." Oliver felt very uneasy. Hadn't the Artful Dodger just stolen from that man? "You have a go," said the Artful Dodger, pushing Oliver into the throng of people. Oliver looked very unsure and didn't know what to do. The Dodger sighed and said, "Look, I'll show you again." He snuck up behind a different man and this time whipped a pretty silk handkerchief out of his pocket. He grinned and ran back to Oliver, stuffing the handkerchief into his hand. The man with the handkerchief had felt it slide from his trousers and turned around angrily. "You boy, you stole my handkerchief!" he bellowed at Oliver. Oliver and the Dodger turned to run, but there was a policeman standing right behind them. Seeing the handkerchief in Oliver's hand, the policeman grabbed him by the ear. The Artful Dodger managed to slip away, but Oliver was in big trouble. The policeman took Oliver to jail, where he stayed for a few days in a gloomy cell, eating nothing but gruel again. The time came for Oliver to go to trial, so he was put into handcuffs and taken to a courtroom with a judge and jury. "You are accused of stealing this man's handkerchief," said the judge. "How do you plead?" "It wasn't me! I've never stolen anything!" cried Oliver. "You are just a street urchin with no mother or father to care about you," said the judge. "You are most certainly a thief." Oliver wept. Suddenly, a man stood up in the courtroom. "This young man is innocent," he shouted. The judge and the jury were very surprised. "How could he be innocent?" the judge asked. "I am a bookseller, and this theft happened right in front of my shop," the man said. "I see street urchins stealing things every day. I have never seen this young boy before, and on this occasion he did not take the handkerchief. Another boy, who I often see picking pockets, took it and placed it into this boy's hand." The jury gasped. The bookseller was a well-respected member of the city, and they knew he would be telling the truth. Oliver was free to go. He wept with joy as he was released from his handcuffs and ran happily out into the sunshine. Standing outside the courtroom, he suddenly realized he was alone again with nowhere to go. He didn't want to go back to Fagin and those thieving boys. He was frightened of getting into more trouble, and he certainly didn't want to steal from people. He sat down on the steps, feeling very alone. The bookseller saw him looking so unhappy and went to sit beside him on the steps. "Where will you go, boy?" he asked. Oliver began to cry and told the bookseller he had nowhere to live. "Well," said the bookseller, "you seem like a good little fellow. I've been looking for someone to help me with my bookshop. I'll pay you a few coins each day, and you can stay with my wife and me. We don't have any children, and I'm sure she would like to help you. What do you say?" Oliver was overjoyed. He took the bookseller's hand, and together they went back to the bookshop. Oliver had stayed honest, and now he would be repaid for his good heart with some luck. He lived happily with the bookseller and his wife, helping him to stack and dust the shelves. But he hadn't seen the last of Fagin and the Artful Dodger.